Good day, everyone. Welcome to the Live with Kevin. If this is your first time with us, we're so glad that you're here. If it's not, we're so glad that you're back. If you're with us live, I hope that you will join us and make this an even better conversation. I'm going to tell you what we're going to do here right now. So you can see up in the corner, it says celebrating 30 years. So at 30 years ago, just a couple of days ago, it was 30 years since I turned in my badge and turned in my keys and no longer got a paycheck from anybody else. So for 30 years, we've been working with leaders, helping teams and organizations get better and make a bigger difference in the world. And so one of the things we're doing to celebrate 30 years, we wanted to do that, but we didn't really want to make it about us directly. So we've created a series of these live streaming events. This one is the second of them. And in each of these cases, there have been over 600 times where I have been doing the interviewing of someone else. And I've been on a lot of podcasts, but this series is the first time when I've had someone sort of interviewing me or where I am more of the focus of the conversation than the other way around. And so we decided to do this series as a part of our kicking off our 30-year celebration. And so that's why we're here. But why you're here is to get great value from the session, right? And then one of the ways for you to do that is to engage. So the first thing you can do, whatever platform you're on right now, if you're with us live, say hello and tell us where you're located. That would be interesting and fun, and it'll get you used to typing. Because as we go, I hope that if you've got a question, you'll ask it, a comment, you'll share it, and we'll try to incorporate those as much as we can. Although I won't be the one leading this once we get started here in just a second. So that's why we're doing these. And by the way, if you're watching this later and not live, and you say, well, I can't ask a question now, Kevin, you're not here anymore. You can, if you're on LinkedIn, you can send it to me on LinkedIn. I'll try to get you an answer one way or another, point you to a resource, share a short answer, etc. If you're watching on another platform, you can go to LinkedIn. You can send us an email to info@kevinikenberry.com. Ask your question there. I'll try to get you an answer one way or another. And with that, I'm going to introduce our guest. So I'm going to introduce her in a second. Well, let me do that first, and then I'll tell you why I've asked her to do this. Meredith Bell is the co-founder and president of Grow Strong Leaders. Her company publishes software tools and books that help people build strong relationships at work and home. She is an expert in leader and team communications, the author of 3 books, and the host of the Grow Strong Leaders podcast, which I have been on. And Meredith and I have known each other for a long time. And when we decided to do this sort of a series, we wanted people that, number one, that I trusted and believed in, and number two, that I thought could hold up their end of the mic. And certainly as an existing podcaster, she can do that. I've been honored to be on her podcast. And so at this point, I'm going to put up her website right here, growstrongleaders.com, although I think I have an extra, no, growstrongleaders.com. Make sure you check that out. And with that, I'm going to relinquish control to Meredith, and she's going to lead us on. We're going to talk about, I think we're going to talk about coaching today, right?
Yes. The topic was what really makes coaching work. And, Kevin, I have been a fan of yours for a long time. I've got your different books. The Long Distance Leader is the one I was looking at and thinking about our conversation today, because you wrote so to me, so many important points around leaders and this role of coaching. So I wasn't as interested in talking about external coaches, but more the roles many managers today are being expected to assume, this role of being a coach. And I
would even, if I can just stop right there, I would even say that, maybe we're just now really sort of realizing we should be expecting that, but like, that's, to me, part and parcel of our job. Like, I don't know how we can really think about leading and not see the coaching work as being inside of our circle. That doesn't mean there isn't a role for an external coach, but I'm glad that that's the direction you're wanting to take, is our role as leaders and coaches. I love that.
Mm-hmm. I think the reason I was making that distinction is because it seems like that's being added as like a separate thing. It's being talked about as a separate thing. You're expected to be a coach now, and there's been some resistance. So I'd love to have you talk about why hasn't it been an integral part of what leaders have done in the past? Because I remember in your book, you talked about there being this gap where it's an area that many leaders don't feel confident or competent in.
Well, that's part of the issue. But I think let's back up and say first that if we went back, you can see, I'll see the color of my hair. If you go back to when I was, a young leader, well, over 30 years ago, clearly we're celebrating 30 years in business. That if you asked leaders, are you responsible? Is it part of your job to do performance reviews, performance management? Everyone will say, yeah. And to which I would say, well, then that's already part of coaching. That, we can take the stigma out of all of that. But as leaders, we're tasked with, we're held responsible for reaching outcomes, which requires all of our people in order to reach those outcomes. And so if people are doing a fabulous job in reaching those outcomes, we need to coach them to continue to do that, to reinforce that, and help them get even better. And if people are falling short of those expectations, then we would coach them in that regard. So again, I think that part of it's language, that we could go back, like I said, 30 plus years and say, is performance management part of our job? And everyone would say yes. Maybe at the same time, if you said, is coaching part of your job? They say no. And yet to me, they're in many ways, they're in the same sphere of stuff. That's the first part. And then the second thing is that, we as organizations haven't always held us as leaders accountable for that. And so if I'm a leader and I've got a leader that works for me that is not confident in coaching, and I'm not really holding them to that, then they're probably not going to do it very well, right? So if organizationally we've sort of figured out that that's got to be a more explicit part of the job, a big challenge is people don't feel confident. They don't feel comfortable. They don't feel competent. They don't have the tools in their toolkit to do it well.
So speaking of the tools, what do you see as the tools that they need in order to become more comfortable and feel more competent in serving in that role of coach?
Well, I think the first thing is that we need to take some of the pressure off of ourselves, because a lot of times people say, well, if I'm supposed to be the coach, I don't know exactly what to say. I don't know how to give that feedback in a way that they'll get it. Like all this pressure about how do I say it right? There's all these books about, here are the 3,412 phrases you can use to be a better coach and all that stuff. To which I say, stop and remember that coaching is about the other person's performance, which means that ultimately this needs to be a conversation. And so when leaders realize, okay, I can have a conversation, when we help them reframe it as we're having a conversation about helping people get better, whether that's because they're below the minimum standard, we've got to get better to get to the minimum standard, or whether that's they're in the range of what's expected for that job, which, there's always a range, right? And maybe they're in the middle of that range and we're coaching them to the top of that range, or whether someone is a freaking rock star in their current role and is already blowing out the doors, but we're trying to coach them to yet another level of success. There's always something we're helping people move toward. And so whatever the situation, that as a coach, if we realize that what we need to be doing is helping them make that move, then we quickly realize that it's not about us, it's really about them. And so it ought to be a conversation. So I imagine we'll talk about a lot of other stuff related to that before we're done, in terms of other things we can be doing as to make coaches more comfortable. One is, it's a conversation. It's ultimately an exercise in influence, not an exercise in control, which means, so Meredith, let's just think about this. People get promoted to being a leader because they were really good at doing stuff that was in their control. Once you're a leader, there's almost nothing in your control anymore. It's always what you're influencing, right? And so that's a piece of this too, I think.
Mhm. It's such a good point. And just thinking about the pressure and if people can, like you say, reframe this as a conversation. And to me, even further than that is a place of curiosity where you're asking questions. And so the burden is not on you to provide answers. And so, talk about how someone can improve in their ability to ask questions. And let me qualify that a bit because sometimes people ask questions firing one after another, and it feels like an inquisition.
It is not
So
the
what's
Spanish
the right
Inquisition, right?
balance of becoming curious and asking questions without intimidating the person?
Well, let's start there. You're the boss, so there's already the risk of intimidation, right? There's already a power differential. So even if you don't mean for it to be or intend for it to come across as inquisition-y, there's a real risk there. And so we've got to slow down. I mean, if we think about a conversation, yes, there has to be questions in order to move a conversation. And it's a directed conversation in that we're not just having a conversation around the campfire talking about whatever comes up. We're having a
Mhm.
conversation about someone's performance and what's going well and what they could do better and all those sorts of things. And so it's still directed. I think that um, there's so much about questions. We could have this whole conversation about that, Meredith. But uh, one is, to your point, slow down, ask a question, wait, right? And sometimes the people we're coaching might not be expecting us to ask. They might be expecting us to tell for all sorts of reasons. And so we've got to ask, we've got to wait, and we may have to ask again in a different way. And we need to sit back like I'm trying to do right now and change our voice so that it doesn't come across as threatening or perceived as so intimidating. Like, listen, Meredith, I just want to know what you're thinking about this. So one of the ways that I like to start is just say, so let's say I was coaching you about a specific situation. Like, so Meredith, you know that I was at that meeting yesterday that you had that large role in and that you gave that presentation in. And I have some thoughts about how it went, but I'm really curious. How do you think it went? Right. And really then wait and let Meredith sit on that. And if she doesn't come up with anything, it doesn't become a stare down, but it becomes so, listen, I there's not a right answer here. I'm just curious about how did you feel during it? How did you feel after it? What did you think? What are your observations about it? So I want to just give you, in this case, the chance to share. And in order for the questions to be effective, we have to be curious, right? To your point, like anyone can make a list of questions and ask them, but to be good at asking questions, we've got to really care about the answer, right?
Mhm.
And we've got to believe they have an answer. And so we need to ask expectantly, if you will.
Mhm. That's such a good point, and I love that you mentioned belief. Believing in them because I think that's there's 2 sides of that that just popped in my head. One is the belief about the leader, about their own ability to coach, and the other is their belief about that person who's in front of them. What are the past experiences or interactions they've had that are bringing to bear beliefs about that person, and how does that influence? So talk about both sides of that as it relates to coaching someone.
Well, I was just doing a session for a client that finished an hour and 15 minutes ago. And we talked about this a little bit. So just everybody imagine for a second that there are two people that work for me, Renee and Curtis. And let me just tell you, I would never tell them this, Meredith, but Renee, she's a flat out rock star. Like Renee has got it going on. Like Renee can do it pretty much anything. And if I give her a little bit of space, a little bit of time, she'll figure it out. Like she's probably going to have my job sooner than later. Renee is a rock star. Curtis, Well, Curtis, he's a good guy, solid guy. Like Curtis a lot. Good guy, tries hard, right? Gets the job done. Barely. Like he's like maxed out. Like this is all Curtis has got. Like he's given me all he's got, and it's just about meeting. Like Curtis is a C performer. Like he's doing the job, but that's it. Now, Meredith, I will never tell either of them that exactly, but will they know how I feel? Will they know what I believe?
Yes, most likely.
And will it impact, now to your point, will my belief impact their performance?
Absolutely.
100%. Everybody here, even if I'm wrong, like if there was a machine where we could, like an MRI machine, but it was like a potential machine, like we could put people in this sucker and out would come a potential score. Like if it was a real, true qualitative measure of potential. And let's imagine that Curtis and Renee both go into that thing and they both have a score, but they don't know the score and I don't know the score. But the actual score is that Curtis has a higher one than Renee the rock star. That fact would not change the outcome of the story. My belief as a leader, as a coach, has a huge impact on people's performance because people tend to live up or down to our belief in them. And so I say, if you don't believe the person you're coaching is capable of achieving what you're coaching them to reaching the expectation, if you don't believe they're capable, if you don't believe they will, then you will never coach them successfully because it's not intentional. It's just what's in our head, right? Like our belief is a huge part of this.
Mm-hmm.
Huge part of this. Because, oh, by the way, I've just described the Pygmalion effect, right? And the reality too is that impacts both Renee and Curtis's belief in themselves too,
Yeah.
right? Not only is Renee working hard to live up to my level of belief in her, but that is increasing her level of belief in herself along the way, and vice versa for Curtis.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So what tip?
I'm talking too much. Sorry.
No, I'm just thinking for a leader who, first of all, what's hitting me is you've got to have a level of awareness to recognize we all do this, and so that recognizing, oh, I tend to favor, whether I try to be impartial or not, I'm internally favoring somebody and I want to move past that. So I am more inclusive of people.
So the minute we realize we favor someone in our head, we've already done it in 100 ways we don't even realize. So like once we come to that conclusion, it's already time to go into cleanup duty, right? If you will. And that's maybe a bad way to think about it. But Ryan Gottfredson, who's a friend of mine, who's been on Virtual LeaderCon, as you've been on Virtual LeaderCon, and he's written a couple of books. He told us a couple weeks ago on Virtual LeaderCon that 95% of people believe they are highly self-aware, but 10 to 15% of people are. Now, I had never read the numbers, but it doesn't surprise me at all. I've always said for a long time, is like, we all think we're way more self-aware than we actually are, right? Like 60% of American men believe they are above average drivers. That's not even possible for 60% to be above average. Like it's not even possible, right? So, and so to me, that's a huge piece of this. Like when we do become aware of it, if we do, it's in a way too late. It's not too late to change it, but things have already happened. Now, if our belief is that it's Renee, then that's actually good regardless, right? The concern is it's not that the favoring of someone, it's the disfavoring of someone that's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
If it makes sense.
It does. Well, people pick up on a leader's preferences. They see it in terms of how many times they call the person or put them on a specific project. I mean, there are all these things. So let's think about a leader that's sitting here realizing, oh, I want to become more equitable in how I coach, how I treat people. What would you recommend as one or two things they might do to help them become stronger in this area?
I think the first thing that I would say is that, I mean, I understand where the question is coming from, because I framed this around Renee and Curtis. Like, I understand that, and yet I don't think it's about the comparison. I think it's about uh, changing my belief about Curtis. So let's
Mhm.
say there's someone that you just let's just be honest, Meredith. Everyone who's listening's got someone. You got one on your team. I'm like, if Kevin could just give me the golden nugget here about how to fix that one. And to which I would say number one is, we have just identified the person you need to be thinking about here, right? Because if that's where your head is, and we've all been there, I get that. The first thing I always say to that is, so do they know what you expect? Because if they don't know what you expect, how can they possibly deliver? It's not possible. So what I'm saying is, part of that belongs to us right off the bat. And then the second thing is, if that's where my head is, if my eyes roll when I think of that person, then I know that I need to start changing my movie about that person. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't things that frustrate me. I'm not saying to deny that. I'm saying, is that all I'm seeing? Chances
Mhm.
are, in your life, you have played the slug bug game or the punch buggy game, right? Everybody, if you don't know this, it's like you see the Volkswagen, right? And if you see the Volkswagen, it's a legal way to hit people in a car. Like, I see the black Volkswagen, so I get to hit you saying I saw the black Volkswagen. Slug bug black, no tag backs. I hit you, you can't hit me back. Now, in our family, our kids, we never let them hit because I was playing and I was driving, so I couldn't hit you safely. But we would play, we would count. And here's the thing: we see what we're looking for. Once we
Mm.
start playing, we start seeing the Volkswagens that were already there. So our confirmation bias, our belief about someone, is looking for things to reinforce the pattern we already see. So we've got to start looking for the things that people do well, not just focus on their weaknesses, but notice and validate their strengths. This does not mean we ignore the weaknesses. It just means that both are true. That's what it means. Both are true.
Mhm. You know, I think there's another piece to this too. Oftentimes, I know it's true for me, I've seen it true for others. When someone really frustrates us, there's something about ourselves that we're seeing in them that we don't always own up to. And so it's almost like confronting ourselves if we're going to work on making a change in this person. I see you nodding your head. Do you
Oh, for sure.
agree with that?
That's for sure. Whether it's whether it's on the side of, well, that's easy, why can't they do that? That's easy. Or whether it's on the side of, well, better to be thinking about what they're failing at than what I'm failing at. If I can move move the focus on them, then I won't be having to think about me, or neither will anyone else. Like, there's all sorts of stuff there. 100%.
Well, I want to look at what is it that someone can do in that coaching role that is going to have the effect of inspiring others to do their best. What would an effective coach look like in terms of what they might say or do with someone? Let's assume we've equalized, our attitude about folks.
Well, I think the first thing is, people know we care, and people know we believe in them, right? That So they know we care, they know we believe in them, and we're not focusing on them and not on us. In other words, we're not asking them to do stuff that we're not willing to do. Like, let's be honest. If we're coaching someone to change a behavior, that's hard, right? They have a habit. And so I think we need to recognize that, right? And if the people we are coaching see us as being coachable, if they see us as being willing to change too, then that immediately impacts our effectiveness. So those would be three things. I'm sure
Mhm.
there's a lot more. But those
Well,
are three things.
I couldn't agree more about people, knowing that you care about them, that you believe in them. And this whole thing of being willing to be vulnerable and honest and do the work on us, I think that makes such a difference when it's not do as I say, but, I'm in this with you. We're on the same side of the table. I'm in your corner. Different ways that is conveyed. And you're right about changing behavior. And that's where, to me, this whole topic of coaching that really works. What is it that leaders need to do? I loved one of the phrases you have in your book about checking in versus checking up. Right? Do I have that right?
Yeah.
And
So
what
here's
is that? How does that tie into what we're talking about?
well, that's in the book, The Long Distance Leader, because so often people, when they're leading at a distance, people are like, why do they keep checking up on me? Well, so this goes back to the idea of expectations, right? So first of all, well, I'll come back. I had another observation as you were talking that I want to make sense to talk about, but let me answer your question first. That people don't feel like we're checking up if there's a clear expectation, right, Meredith? If you're my boss and I know that we're going to have a one-on-one once a week, even if I wish it was once every 2 weeks, I'm not going to feel like you're checking up on me. You're checking in, like it's scheduled, it's planned, it's a part of our process, and so that changes it. So the expectations of timeliness, the expectations of how it's going to work makes a difference. Here's the other thing: if you have made me crystal clear about what's expected, and you know that I know the expectations, you are less likely to micromanage me. You are less likely to check up on me because, like, why does micromanaging happen? One of the big reasons it happens is because I'm just not sure if they really know. I got to make sure that they're heading in the right direction. But if the expectations had been made clear and those ongoing coaching conversations about not only the what of the expectations, but the how of the expectation, then the need for a lot of that will melt away. Right. There are other
Mhm.
reasons people micromanage that go beyond that, but that's a big part of it. The other thing I wanted to go back to, as I listened to you skillfully paraphrase what I had said about, encouraging, believing in them and those things. I was thinking about this like someone who's listening and saying, yeah, but Kevin, what about the work? This sounds an awful lot like, well, you're focused on them, but what about the work? And the reality is coaching has to start with the work. The work is, here's the expectation. Here's where you are. There's a gap in that between where you are and where we need you to be, where we'd like you to be, or where you could be, right? In behaviors, performance, results, whatever. Like, that's the starting point. And so once that is clear in comparison to where we are now, that gap is the starting point. Once we have, so that's the task part. Once that's clear to both of us, then it becomes all about helping that person get there. And now it's all about helping them get there. But if there's no there, what are you coaching to?
Mhm. Yeah, that's an important point. And just thinking about how a leader can convey that caring to the other person, sometimes that's in the form of being direct and saying, "That's not up to your standards." Being willing to call them on things is a form of showing that you care. So it isn't just, patting them on the back virtually about things and giving them praise that may or may not be earned. There's many ways of demonstrating that they care. Would you agree
Well,
with
first of all,
that?
it's absolutely not about giving them praise that wasn't earned. 100% not, because that ain't going to work. Now, first of all, it's it's silliness, and second of all, it isn't going to work. So I think it's Brene Brown that said that to be clear is to be kind, and a lot of times, which is the first thing I thought of as you were saying that, Meredith, that being clear with people being specific with people, which is different than being direct, by the way. A lot of people will say, well, I just want to be direct and cut to the chase. Well, yeah, except to some people that will be seen as blunt or tactless. And so let's just use the word, let's be clear, right? And again, if we're not clear, no one, how is someone supposed to get better if they don't really know what, if you're beating around the bush trying to make them feel better? Like, no, I love your example. Like, I know that you can do better. I have seen you do better than this. And so what can I do to help you get to that level that you've been and that you can be again? Right. I think it's critical.
Well,
We had a question. Can I stop you for a second? We had a
oh,
question come
yeah.
in a little bit ago. And it's kind of long, but there's a really good point in here. How does someone handle the situation where the coaching expert is attempting to push their agenda forward without realizing it's out of touch? In other words, the coach is asking questions, but the coach has an outcome they're trying to get to, as opposed to using questions to be curious, as you said earlier. And I think the question is going to, like, what do we do if we're the one being coached there? Right. And I'd love your thought. That's a great question. I'd love your thoughts on that.
Just imagining that scenario, the first thought is, gosh, maintain and stay calm and, don't let my emotions take over here and get back to being curious and just stating, it sounds like you're really pushing me for this outcome. And I'm just wondering what's behind your thinking that that's the best way to go, so that we don't get caught up feeling pressure to do it or fight back or whatever, but better understand the other person. And that's what I was going to get to a minute ago, was this whole idea of assumptions that we can make and act from or speak from, instead of finding out what's going on with the other person. If they fell short, or in this case, they're feeling like they're getting pushed to do something, what's behind that, so we understand the other person. I think that's so vital to reaching agreements. And you use the word expectation. I think agreement is a key word here, because the leader can have this expectation, but the other person has to say, yes, I am going to do that, so that they have this agreement in place that then the leader can refer back to if the person does not fulfill whatever that agreement was.
Mutually agreed upon, right? Clear and agreed upon, 100%. Now, if I'm working for you and you have a performance or a results expectation that I can't agree to, then maybe I'm in the wrong job. Like, you have a responsibility to try to help me understand that I'm willing to accept that. But until I do, the likelihood of us getting there is not very high, right? I mean, might get lucky, but not likely, right? So I think you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
What are your thoughts on the question that person posed?
Well, my thoughts go to two sides. Like, make sure as the coach that we're not doing that. And if we're on the other side of it, as I was listening to you, what I was thinking of is to do for me to do what you were saying we should do. I have to start by assuming positive intent. The minute I think that coach is trying to railroad me or take me to their agenda, and I see that, and then the minute it becomes a problem for me is when I start to say, well, why are they doing that to me? What are they trying to do? What's their agenda? Was the word that questioner used. And now I am no longer assuming even benign intent. I'm assuming they have something bad for me and good for them for this to happen. I'm getting manipulated. I've got to get out of that place. And I've got to get back to a place of, as you said, curiosity for myself. But why can't I start with the assumption that their intention is good, even if it doesn't feel like that to me right now? And if I do what you suggested, I'll find out, or I'll have a better chance of finding out what their intention is, which might help us to solve it or resolve it is better.
It's so hard to avoid getting our egos pulled in, because we want to defend ourselves. I like this focus on, assuming a positive intent initially, because that's really true of most people. there's very few people that are really out to get us, and we don't know what's going on with them, what pressure they may be under. If somebody else hired them to coach us, then they may be
They may be
having
feeling all
an
sorts of
agreement.
pressure that, man, they better get it right or I'm not going to be seen as an effective coach. I won't be doing my job.
Yeah.
And which takes us back to something that we often start with when we teach coaching is we talk about the ABCs of coaching, and the first A, and the A is accountability. Like, who's accountable for the coaching? Well, the coach is accountable for doing coaching, right? The activity of doing it and doing it well. But who's ultimately responsible for or accountable for the outcome? The person being coached, right? It's their behavior that needs to be sustained, maintained, or adjusted, not the coach, right? You could argue that a coach could be a tremendous coach and someone might not make any change. That doesn't necessarily make them a bad coach. And yet, a
Mhm.
lot of times, we feel like, well, if they don't change, then I haven't succeeded. Well, that's useful in the fact of being persistent and continue to try different things. But ultimately, you can only influence their behavior.
Mhm.
You can't control their behavior, right? So,
Mhm.
which leads us to micromanaging, which leads people to simply complying and saying, "Okay, Meredith, because you're the boss, I'll do it." But that doesn't mean I like it. And we don't really want people there unless we absolutely have to, right?
Mhm.
We don't want to settle for that unless we have to.
Yeah. And just thinking about the other person, the coachee, being the one
Yeah.
responsible for putting into action whatever the coaching involved, and then if they fall short, the coach being willing to address that, but also not make assumptions about why they fell short, but getting into, a dialogue about that. And I think an important part of that, Kevin, is just recognizing, and this requires getting to know somebody, that if they're offering an excuse, you recognize it and you call them on it, so that you don't allow them to fool themselves or you about why they didn't get something done.
There's a difference between an excuse and an explanation. Uh, but an excuse absolves me of having to take any action, right? An explanation says, "Here's what happened," but it still gives us the chance to say, "Okay, but what about next time? What will I do different? What will you do differently next time?" An excuse is like, "Well, it's not me. Go talk to HR. That's an HR problem. That's, if my computer hadn't messed up." Well, have you turned your computer off anytime in the last 16 weeks? Because if you had and turned it back on, it might have worked just fine. Like, so what part of this is mine, right? And so uh,
Mhm.
we have to hold that mirror up to the folks we're coaching to say, wait a minute, it's not. I know you're not responsible for your computer. I mean, like, you don't have to know everything about the computer, but there's some part of this that belongs to us. What could you do that might change it? Right.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's a really important aspect of coaching, to help to ask questions in a way that gets the other person to think. Because too often, I think this is one of the challenges not just leaders, parents can have, where if somebody comes to us with a problem and we feel responsible to be the answer person to them, instead of pausing and asking questions that cause them to have to think through what the options are or what they might do, what the consequences could be. I think that's a key part of coaching also, is knowing when to not provide answers, but help the person become more self-reliant.
As our friend Michael Bungay Stanier would say, tame the advice monster, right?
Yeah.
We've got to tame the advice monster and not go to that too soon. And I think that there are coaches, and now I'm sort of talking about the external coach more than the internal coach. But I think there are external coaches that, like, so here's the spectrum. I'm never going to tell you anything. I'm only going to keep asking you questions. Uh, I'm going to give you advice because that's really what you want or need. And we can make a mistake at either end of that spectrum,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? And I think that most leader coaches, manager coaches, probably run the risk of going too far toward the advice side than to the too many questions side. And I think that there are some coaches that go too far the other direction, to be honest with you. But even if we are going to be asked to give advice, we can't do it too early if we're really trying to help people change performance. That's my take on that.
Yeah, I think people are more committed when they've come up with the idea themselves, and then you affirm the wisdom they've shown, as opposed to, I just think back to being a parent and telling your kids something, forcing them to do something versus them figuring it out themselves.
Totally different.
It sticks so much better.
I always say people don't argue with their own data. And the other thing is, when someone comes to a conclusion that matches the one that was in your head, don't say, that's exactly right. No, just say, I think that's a really good idea. It's their idea.
Yeah. Oh, that's such an important point, Kevin. This again is where our egos can get in the way, because it's like, I want to be seen as right. I want to be seen as smart, as opposed to allowing others' good ideas and brilliance to be recognized itself.
Coaching is ultimately about helping people get, it could be improved, but it's get and keep great results, great performance, best behaviors, whatever, right? And it's the other person that's doing all those things. So we need to create ownership for them. And we all know that the most powerful learning is the learning we discover for ourselves. So a really good coach helps people discover it as much as possible. When I come up with that aha moment, I am not likely to forget it.
That's right. And, the other thing this ties in with is today's employees want opportunities to grow and learn, not necessarily to be promoted. And if there's their
or not
boss,
only to be promoted, right?
right. But if their boss is somebody that really takes the time to coach them, talk about a retention strategy. Who wants to leave an organization when they feel like they are being cared about, believed in, challenged to grow and expand, so they can feel like they're able to move towards their potential.
100%. Survey after survey after survey says some version of this. People want a boss that they know, like, and trust. And the more they know, like, and trust us, the easier it is for us to coach them, as it turns out. Meredith, I knew this would happen, that we would have a really good conversation. And hopefully others of you who are watching this live or later agree or find value in this. But I have certainly had a great time. Meredith, I hope that you have as well.
I have. It's been
And
great.
I'm taking the mic back because I'm looking at the time, and we've probably gone long enough for everyone who's listening. We certainly appreciate all of you that have joined us. And again, whether it's live or later, or maybe it's some snippet of this that we've created to share. So appreciate all of you and hope you found value. But Meredith, I appreciate you, and thank you for investing your valuable time with me and with those who are watching. Because this was great fun for me. It's an honor for me to have had the chance to learn with you for the last 45 minutes. And I just want to thank you so much for being a part of this.
Oh, my pleasure. And congratulations on your 30 years. I just think that's awesome.
Well, I kind of do too. So everybody, that's the end of this session. We've got more of these coming. If you whatever platform you're watching on, if you pay attention, you'll see that there will be more. And I'm looking forward to all of them. And I'm looking forward to seeing you on some of those in the coming weeks throughout the month of October. And for now, we'll let you all go. And I hope that you will remember what I tell people at the end of every email I send, which is that you are remarkable. Thanks, everybody.